at the end of the day, it comes down to profit drivers as well. And
Definitely.
you have to have major profit drivers. What that means is you have to have reasons for people to come into an area. And most good areas have multiple profit drivers.
You know, it's easier to go into a saturated market, you know, get your unfair share of business compared to going into a market and creating that demand.
Yeah.
And so the profit drivers play into that.
Hi, I'm Wyatt. And I'm Grace. And you're listening to Our Dad and your host of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast.
What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Shawn Moore, and I'm here with our acquisitions manager, Mr. Jaycob Payne. Thanks for joining me, brother.
Of course, dude. I've been here 2 years waiting for invites.
First time on the podcast. Old Jaycob has to. He's the kind of the brains and behind looking over all of the deals for our members. And so one of the things we have here at Vodyssey is we've got a mentorship coaching program. Part of that coaching program is teaching people how to underwrite these deals, because the name of the game for any successful investor is buying the right property in the right market, right? It's a critical component to it. Jaycob is our acquisitions manager and has his a finger on the pulse of what's going on in the short-term rental market when it comes to acquiring the right properties, understanding income, understanding how to underwrite these deals. And Jacob's role in Vodyssey is to help all of our members look over their shoulder, make sure the T's are crossed, the I's are dotted. We teach them how to underwrite. It's one thing when you're underwriting one or two deals for your first time, or in your case, where you've underwritten thousands of deals over the years, right? And we've looked at so many different properties and so many different markets and being able to identify some of the little nuances. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today, you guys. And so I'm going to talk to Jaycob about some of the common mistakes that people make when they're underwriting properties, some of the things that he looks for on our team and when we're going into different markets and looking for emerging markets, looking for different opportunities within markets and what that looks like. Because like I said, the very first part of successful investing is getting the right product in the first place and selecting the right market that's investable, that can help you meet your property goals. One of the things that I always say is, one, when you start anything, you got to identify your outcome, and then you got to select a vehicle that can help you achieve that outcome. And selecting a vehicle is more than just going and buying a property. Like if you identify, in our case, short-term rentals, you can't just go buy any short-term rental, right? I mean, you've seen that so many times that some markets work, some markets don't work, some properties work, some properties don't work. I always say there's good properties and bad properties in every market, but you know, there's a lot of different things to look at. So what do you think some of the most common mistakes people make when they go into these markets? When they're starting to say, okay, I like short-term rentals, I want to go buy short-term rentals. What are some of the things that you see that you're saying, okay, over and over, I notice that people are making this mistake or this assumption?
Yeah, great question. It really comes down to knowing the numbers of the market, knowing that revenue range, right? So every market's going to have a low point and a high point. Each property's going to fall somewhere on that scale. The biggest mistake I see people make is probably not knowing where to put each individual property, not underwriting it correctly. The numbers aren't right. So typically it's usually higher. They're high on the estimate versus lower. And so really finding good comps in the market and knowing those numbers is number one mistake I see.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I always say, you know, one, we want the easy button in today's day and age, right? And there's so many software tools that claim, hey, plug your address in, plug the market in, go ahead and I'll tell you how much revenue you're going to make. And I haven't seen a marketing tool that actually gives them a decent range that's realistic, right? And that range can be really, really wide. And I think I totally agree with you. Biggest misconceptions is, and it ends up being a mistake for a lot of new investors, is that they dive into the game and they don't realize what that range is, first of all, and then they don't realize how wide that range is, right?
And certain things to do to get on top of that range or stay in the middle. I mean, a lot of times, you know, we preach about having great photo shoots and great listings, stuff like that. People go in with a very average listing and just want to be at the very top one. That's not achievable.
You're not going to happen, right? There's levers you have to pull. If you're not willing to pull those levers, you're not going to raise on the price tiers within that market range, right? And it makes it really difficult to underwrite if you're just saying, okay, I'm going to pick somewhere in the middle of the market, or I'm going to go to these software tools, plug in my address and take that number. If you don't know, like, what if they told you, let's say the revenue range in a market is from 50,000 to 150,000, and that's not unlikely in some scenarios, right? That's and you're like, man, that's $100,000 swing. Yeah, that's a big swing. So how are you accurately going to underwrite something if you don't even understand how to dial in where you're going to be on that range? And let's say the software tool comes out and says, okay, you're going to be at $90,000, and you're like, okay, that sounds good. I can underwrite that, but you don't even know what it takes to be Yeah, kind of. That's above the mid scale. You're kind of upscale, not quite at the top of the market, but you're above the average.
Yeah.
What does that take? Is the proximity correct? Is the experience you're selling correct? The software tools can't judge. They can judge proximity,
right?
Because they can judge the location, because that's a static thing that the software tool can judge. But that's it. There's way more things than just location that makes a difference on your revenue.
It doesn't dive into any of the amenities, like experience you have to offer. So yeah, totally agree.
Awesome. And so I totally agree. That's one of the biggest things that a lot of new investors and seasoned investors really. I mean, it's crazy how many people come to us and they own a lot of properties and they're fairly seasoned investors and they still miss that mark on the underwriting. What about markets? Are there markets that you guys and you guys being us, right, that we're looking at that you're excited about right now? Are there markets that you feel like are a little tougher? What are some of the markets that you're finding that seem to be more investable than others right now?
Yeah, so Intermountain West, where we live, it's tough to cash flow right now. Appreciation the last couple of years have gone through the roof. Not saying it's impossible, but definitely more of a challenge. So the eastern half of the U.S. is probably where I lean to right now, where we own properties, Georgia, North Carolina, Florida's always a hot spot. So kind of that eastern half is where I would point to.
Yeah, because the reason for that is, you guys listening, the reason for that is the ratio between acquisition costs, because you're mentioning acquisition cost is so high versus the revenue they generate, right? In the beginning, we were talking about revenue, and we have to judge the investability based on that ratio, right? How much are we paying? How much can we make? And what does that look like? We want to pay low, make high. Out west, like you're saying, Intermountain West, you got a high acquisition cost versus the revenue that they generate. Not that they don't generate revenue, it's just that ratio is not as favorable for us as investors. And so I like that. In Southeast is where we like the Southeast, the eastern part of the U.S. We're looking at some of the college town markets.
Right, yeah, those are really big right now.
Yeah. And a lot of those are smaller markets. When you look, I mean, you can invest in them, sub 300 in a lot of these college towns, right? In major colleges, and those are major profit drivers.
Right, those college towns, like, the big SEC schools, game days are huge out there, graduation, so many college-related events that bring people to the market. So yeah, those do really well.
Yeah, good. There is one thing that can make or break your success with short-term rentals, and that's your ability to provide your guests with an amazing night's rest. We all know how crucial a good night's sleep is for our guests, and that perfect night's sleep completely depends on your choice of mattresses. While that sounds simple, it can be an overwhelming decision to select the correct mattress for your vacation rentals. Well, I've got some fantastic news for you. We're taking all of the guesswork out of selecting the perfect mattress system. We've been testing and perfecting the perfect mattress program for over 2 years, and we've partnered with one of the top mattress manufacturers to bring you the customized Vodyssey sleep system. The best part is we've secured an exclusive deal that gives you a fantastic 55% off these amazing custom mattresses. Personally, I have these custom mattresses in every one of my short-term rentals, and the feedback has been incredible. We love them so much that we even got them in our own personal homes here in Utah. These mattresses are built to order, and they're going to ship to you within 5 to 7 business days at the time of your order. This ensures that these mattresses are not sitting in a box and damaging the integrity of the mattress over time, which is what you will find in many big box stores. So visit VodysseysleepSystem.com and use the promo code PODCAST. It's all caps at checkout to get 55% off. That is your key to wholesale pricing on all the Vodyssey mattresses. Again, that's VodysseysleepSystem.com and use the code PODCAST, all caps at checkout. And the Vodyssey Sleep System, you guys, was built to help you elevate your short-term rental guest experience, which is going to result in more money in your pocket. It combines unmatched comfort, personalized perfection, and top-notch quality at ridiculously low prices. The deal is perfect for elevating the sleep experience for all of your guests in your short-term rentals, as well as for the sleep for you and your family at home. So head over to VodysseysleepSystem.com, use the promo code PODCAST, all caps, to order yours today. Cheers, my friends. Are you, like when we're looking at some of these markets and you put it together and then we publish it and send it out kind of every quarter, we kind of identify our top 10 markets, and we try to do different price tiers, right?
Right.
When we're looking at it, we say, okay, let's look, sub 300, let's look through, 3 to 5, and then we'll look over 5.
Right.
For different people that are looking in different price tiers to find out the investability. But at the end of the day, it comes down to profit drivers as well. And
Definitely.
You have to have major profit drivers. What that means is you have to have reasons for people to come into an area. And most good areas have multiple profit drivers. It doesn't mean that you don't have a target audience that's coming in for one profit driver, but most of the major markets that have good investability, they have, like even the college towns, they'll have the college stuff, but then they might have some state parks, or they might have some other things that are going on.
I've heard you say in the past before, it's easier to go into a saturated market, saturated and go, get your unfair share of business compared to going into a market and creating that demand.
Yeah.
And so the profit drivers play into that.
Let's talk about saturation. When you're underwriting markets, when you're going through this, do you even look at saturation? Do you care? Is it even a factor when you're saying, okay, I want to be here or I don't want to be here? What is your...
Honestly, I probably don't pay too much attention to it if it's on a higher side. So like Orlando, for example, thousands of properties. You can still go in there and do okay. But if it's on the lower side, say there's a market that only has, 10 active properties, it's harder to go in there and, again, create that demand. So I don't pay too much attention to it. I like those bigger markets.
Yeah.
So
And it's interesting because that's the exact opposite of how most people feel. They feel like, and I think that this is another one of those mistakes or misconceptions. They feel like that, this market's big, it's saturated, there's too much competition.
Yep.
I need to find these smaller markets with less competition. It's going to be easier for me to stand out. And that's not the case.
Yeah.
We know that not to not be true.
For sure. Not saying those small markets are terrible investments.
No.
Sometimes they can go and still be really good. But saturation, there's more demand in those saturated areas. So
and like you mentioned, smaller markets. Some of these smaller markets are really fun and really investable, but you have to really know a lot more about it, right?
Yeah.
When some of our members send us the smaller markets, sometimes it's actually harder for you and I
Definitely.
to underwrite those because we always say that those types of markets, you have to have more intimate knowledge of the market,
For
right?
sure.
You should really understand that market at a more intimate level and have personal experience in that market so that you can, because as we go through some of the profit drivers, who the target audiences are, in the bigger markets, we can look that stuff up really, really easily.
Right.
And we can run the numbers and we can identify that. In small markets, it's a little harder to do, right?
Yeah. Then the risk tolerance of the investor needs to be higher in those smaller markets. So with less data, it's, we can't pull numbers out of thin air. So less data to look at, risk tolerance needs to be a little bit higher.
Because we're speculating a little bit more, right? There's just not enough data to pull, to look at, to aggregate, and put together to paint a good picture. When we're underwriting, you're typically looking at markets that have at least 100 properties or more in a similar property type that we can analyze and underwrite so that we feel like we've got enough data to aggregate and make good decisions.
Exactly.
Yeah, awesome. When it comes to, we talk about the importance of the market. We talk about the importance of the property. What is your opinion on proximity? It's obvious in a beach town, the top properties are going to be on the beach. In a ski town, if you're skiing, ski out, right? But you can still make money being off the beaten path a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So, but how much, and this is where it comes down to really understanding that revenue range, I think, and saying, okay, I know this revenue range is here. You're not on the beach. Your proximity is not on the ski hill or ski and ski out or wherever it is that is the real great location in that market.
Right.
But your acquisition price is going to be a lot lower. And so if I know that revenue range, I'm saying, okay, I might be down a price tier or two because my proximity is not ideal, but I also paid less for it. And my revenue looks pretty good. There's many times where being a few rows off the beach because of how much less you pay can be even more investable than being on the beach.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it kind of depends on the market. Like, for example, you mentioned ski towns. If you're more than 30 minutes away, it's hard to, kind of say, hey, I'm close to the ski hill. No one's going to go ski for a full day and drive 30 minutes home. But if you're on the beach, I think if you're a couple rows back, still some good properties there. So I would say if you're sub 30 minutes away, you can still kind of market your property to that big attraction,
right? And like you said, depending on the attraction, right? And the same beaches, you probably want to be within 5 minutes of the beach, right? Ski hill, 30 minutes. It's wintertime. It's snowing. People are like driving on snowy roads. They don't want to drive that far in the mountains, right? And a lot of people are not used to driving in those conditions, and so you have to really say, okay, you might think you're pretty close, but you're really not, right? And so proximity is. I'm glad you brought that up. It's very dependent on the type of location you're in, the profit driver that the proximity is, right?
Yeah.
I've got a property in Destin. I'm a block from the beach, but I can't walk there.
Right.
I have to drive around. I have to get in the car. We have to, we don't have good beach access because right across the street from us is a major resort and they have all the beach access there. We have to go way down the road to the public beach access. So even though my proximity on a map looks really, really good and the software tools that I plugged in the proximity, they give me a false sense of how much money I'm going to make because of my proximity, and my proximity is not that good, actually.
Yeah, that makes me think of another point, too. You should probably never buy a property sight unseen. For that example right there. Yeah. If you read the description, hey, I'm 1 block off the beach, you go, great, I'm just going to buy it and then go see it later. Yeah. You want to check that out beforehand. So.
Absolutely. What about regulations?
Yeah, they're definitely getting a little more strict in certain areas. I'd say the bigger cities are getting more regulated. For example, Nashville, I know, is getting pretty strict. They're always changing, so I'd always just recommend to stay up on them.
That's the key point there. That seems like it's an ever-changing world, right?
Yeah, definitely.
The short-term rental world. The last couple of years, we saw sweeping regulations hit the short-term rental world, and it's kind of settled down a little bit. The last few, we're rolling into 2024 now, and it seems to have settled down. And really, 2022. They really started regulating things hard. You really have to watch it. I mean, and when we start underwriting properties, it's one of the very first things you're looking at. Right? I mean, it's not even, and I mean, before we even look if a property or an area is investable, because there's always properties in all these markets that are really restricted, right? You go into markets that you're not going to be able to operate as a short-term rental. We know you can't get a permit. There are properties on Airbnb. There's going to be properties on the data tools showing income, which they do, but you're not going to be able to do it, or you're taking a risk. You might be shut down tomorrow. And so it's the very first thing that is overlooked on underwriting. Is, I mean, how many times do people get down the road, and even in our mentorship group, they send us in properties, you're reviewing them, you're looking and saying, they can't operate as a short-term rental here, right? And so, which is why we like looking over everybody's shoulder, because they're things that we're used to looking at just on a regular basis, right?
And there's levels to the regulations too. I mean, you got HOA, check your city, your state. So there's a lot of due diligence to do, and that's why I think people kind of skip it sometimes.
They do. It's a pain. And it is. It really is a pain. There's not like a great spot that you can just go and find out whether you can operate a short-term rental, right? You really have to dive into the county, the city, the HOA if you're a part of one, and there's layers of rules and regulations that you're going to have to follow, and it is a pain, but it's a necessary evil, and you either do it or you're just rolling the dice. It becomes a very risky proposition. So, starting with the rules and regulations, looking at the acquisition cost versus the revenue potential ratio, to decide if something's investable, and then identifying your property goals. I mean, how many times when somebody's buying a property and you're looking at it, the very first thing you ask them, because I know we wrote the questions, is what are your property goals, right? Is this going to be strictly an investment? What is the outcome you're after with this property? Are you going to use it personally? How much are you going to use it personally? Because that all affects the investability of a market. But a property, for somebody could have a break-even property in the ideal location for them and their family, and it's a lifestyle asset that somebody else is paying for. That could be a great investment for them. For sure. And it might not be a great investment for the person who is looking more for the cash flow, and they're not going to use the property. And so it's really important also to identify what those property goals are and being really clear about it.
Yeah, and then there's factors. I mean, say a property's not cash flowing, like you said, it could still be a great fit to their portfolio because of the appreciation, tax benefits. So really identifying those is a major, first step to do.
Everybody listening, not everybody's a Vodyssey member listening, but it's, and I know you're used to working just within our membership group and sending in these properties. But if you're like, hey, listen, guys, you're listening to this, here's the takeaways I'd love you to get from this episode of understanding acquisition, how important it is. What are some of those things that I'm sure it's just a recap of what we talked about.
Yeah, definitely is. I mean, definitely understanding your underwriting, number one, knowing where your property's going to fall on that revenue range and knowing how to get that revenue range. So if you don't know how to get it, I mean, that's hard to take the next step. So understanding your underwriting, regulations is big. And then lastly, just your property goals.
And I couldn't agree more. And like you said, understanding your underwriting, those of you listening, that's understanding how to run the numbers and where to get the numbers and making sure you're getting good data for those numbers. Garbage in is garbage out. You got to make sure you're putting and pulling good numbers that are accurate to help you make good, solid predictions.
Definitely.
Right? So awesome, man. Well, listen, I appreciate it. That's
anytime,
fun.
Dude. Of course.
It only took us 2 years.
Right next door, dude. Anytime you need me.
I know. I mean, you hear everyone.
Yeah, I hear the podcast live. So
exactly. Awesome, guys. Well, we're going to wrap it up today. I hope you got some value out of this. It is a very, very important topic for those of you buying properties, is obviously understanding your numbers, acquiring the right property, selecting the right locations to ultimately succeed with your investments in short-term rentals. And so we appreciate you joining us today. We know how valuable your time is. And as always, I love it when you spend it with us. I always ask you 2 favors at the end of every episode. The first one is, if you got any value out of this, give us a thumbs up, like it, review it if you have more than 30 seconds on whatever platform you're listening or watching on. If you have somebody else in your world that would love listening to all things short-term rentals, share the show with them. We'd love to have and grow this audience, and that stuff does really help us, and we really appreciate it for those of you listening. And then that final thing and the last thing and the most important thing that I ask you at the end of every episode is go pick that one thing you can do today, start building that life you don't want to take a vacation from. Cheers, my friends.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast. Share this with other people you think need to hear about it. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Hey Grace, is there a website? Yes! For more amazing content and expert advice, visit Vodyssey.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.